Thank you for the introduction. Hey everyone, my name is Siddhant Kate. I hail from Pune, India. Being a part of the application development team, I'm really looking forward to showing you all just how intuitive our platform redSling can be. As we build this lead management module together, you'll see firsthand how user friendly the platform is, even if you have less or no coding experience. We'll start by setting up a lead capture form, move on to assigning said leads to different users within the organization, and also complete the dashboard with a few invoice data cards. And by the end of the session, you'll have a comprehensive understanding of how to leverage redSling for your own lead management needs. Let's get started. So before we begin with actual development of the admin dashboard screen, I would first like to show the audience a picture of what we would be developing today. So this is our admin dashboard, a preview of it. It's complete with a side menu, a few cards to display invoice data, a chart section again to display the invoice data. There is an add contact button which leads to a add contact form that the admin can fill, and a tabular format of all the lead details that have been submitted so far, with a drop down to assign that lead to a specific user within the organization. And then the admin can click on submit to assign the user. Now, before I take you through the screen, I would like to talk about a very important feature of our platform, which is the template fragment. It is a reusable section which can be used across multiple screens within your project, and you have to design and develop a section only once and can be used on multiple screens without actually manually doing it. So I will take you through the steps of what I am doing. First, I have dragged a general column component. I have increased its height to a certain amount, which is 180 VH, and I have also set the width to 100%. So there is also a section in the decorations tab which can be used to set the background color, which I have done here. And the reason to set this to a width of 100% right now, even though it's a side menu on the dashboard, is because it is within the confines of a column component. So on my actual screen, which I would be taking you through in just a minute or two, the dimensions would be adjusted again to the column in which I add this template fragment to. So the first column contains our logo. The second column has been added to introduce a bit of space between the logo and our stellar buttons. Now, stellar button is a general button component which can be used for navigation. In a managed rates section, there is a feature from which you can set the navigation to pages within your application or to an external application as well. And I am just assigning some general styling details to this button to make it pleasing to the eye. The first button is for the capture. Right now I am also changing the background color, keeping it the same as our overall screen background color. And I'll also add an image which would act as an icon for our capture. There is also the feature to replicate what you have done, replicate different components. So it also saves up on time. And I am basically just switching out the text to different components or different values that I would like to have in my side menu navigation component. So this is our template fragment. It would serve the purpose of a side menu on our actual dashboard screen, which you have already seen at the start of our session. And now we can begin with the actual design/development of our admin dashboard. So to take you through, to give you a brief on how an application is developed on our platform, we first design the front end. So our approach is design first, which is why we can develop or design our layout of our screen, we then set up database connectivity, which can be internal or external. And then through our unique feature, the logic builder, which I would also be taking you through in today's session, you can set up the functionality of the page. So because of a shorter time frame, we are creating something very simple. So I have already dragged my template fragment into the left panel, and you can see, even though in my template fragment section, I have given it 100% width, that 100% means that the column in which I have dragged it into on my actual screen, it'll adjust to 100% of that. So here you can see that it has automatically adjusted in just the way we want it to. So it serves the purpose of a side menu. Once that side menu is up, we can go ahead and build the rest of our page. So the first is a simple text which says hello John. I am also assigning a few typography alignments to it, increasing the font size. Then I am using a chart section. I'm using a bar chart and using the data models that I have already created as a prerequisite, which contains the invoice data. I will populate this chart with the date and the amount. And you can also change and switch up the border color for the chart component, and you can also change the data point colors. So we already have a few set colors that we would like to use for our admin dashboard, and then it basically just switches them out. I'm also giving it some specific width and height dimensions to make it more pleasing to the eye. So that is our charts done. Second, we can begin with our card data. Another thing that I have forgotten to mention to the audience is, this is our data model section. So this is where our databases can be created and data can be inputted into it. And you can use these databases for actual live data visualization and manipulation on your editor screen. So for my charts, I have used the chart invoice data model, which contains the amount and the invoice data. Moving on to our cards. So the reason I took you all through the data models is because along with the charts, I would also be using that same chart invoice data model for our cards. This card features the invoice total. We can also give the text. We can change the styling for the text, give it some font size. Right now I'm giving it 18, changing the color to white and making it center aligned. Also changing the font weight to semi bold. Then to the header, parent header, I'm assigning 22 border radius. And I'm also setting a background color. And a box shadow. The last bit to complete this card is a drop down, which I am manually setting to quarters of the year. So the functionality behind this card would be, the user selects either Q1, Q2, Q3 or Q4, which basically denotes the quarters of a year, and depending on the quarter selected, the total of the invoices should be displayed in the section below. Next, we can drag and design our pop-up button, which would serve the purpose of our lead contact form. Again, with how we design the rest of our components, even this component can be given some styling options. So I'm giving it some border radius, changing the color, changing the text to add contact. Next, the section with the tabular format of all our leads. So giving it some sample text to denote the section so the user does not get confused. Making it sort of a banner to denote the division in the section. And then we can add our table. So our builder has a variety of components, and in short, I will take you through some of the general components we have. So far I have used images, I have used buttons, I've used pop-up buttons, stellar buttons, tables. I will soon be using our form component, I would be using for the add contact form, and now I have used the table. Each of these components can be given the separate styling options. Here I am using a different data model to populate the table. So I'm assigning the key names that I would like to be displayed in each of these columns within the table. And this data is also, I have also as a prerequisite made this data model and filled in some data so that we can showcase it for our table component. Then I am changing the column header text to denote what the column stands for. And with the table, you can also set custom styling options. Once that table is made, there should also be a form submit button so that when the admin decides which user to assign that lead to, he can click on submit and that lead gets assigned. And similar to how we have designed our pop-up button, we'll go ahead and design our submit button in the same manner. Give it border radius, change the text color to white, and then change the background color to our blue. Then I am also dragging another drop down in the final column of our table, and that drop down I will also be giving some specific styling options, and I'll be changing the traits or manipulating the traits of this drop down with the same or a different data model, which is the user data model, so that the list of users is mentioned within that drop down, and then the admin can choose which user to assign the lead to. So again, as a prerequisite, that data model has already been created with 2 or more users. And now that that drop down has been added, I would also like to showcase another very cool feature for our platform, which is the Google Translate. So in case your application or a screen has a specific use case where all the content of it has to be switched out to a different language, it can be done so. So in this case, I have selected Spanish, and all the text content of the page instantly gets translated to Spanish. So that's another very cool feature depending on the use case you have. Now this was Spanish, and we have a long list of different languages. This is French. So you can see that it's instantaneous. And in case you want to translate back to English, you can click on show original, and then the page content will again translate back. So that was our Google Translate component. Now moving back to our admin dashboard design. Now that the base components have been set, the final thing left to do is to make our contact form. So like I mentioned, we have a forms section where we have a different set of inputs depending on what we would like to capture from our users. The first few you see here are our text inputs, so that the user inputs string values. Then there's an email input, a number input, and then completing it with a form submit button. And to make this form a little more appealing, again changing out the styling a little bit, assigning some margins to each of the inputs, we can make this more pleasing. And now we can change the labels of these inputs to what we would like to capture from our user. So the first is the name of the lead, the department, the company, the industry. Then we would have our stage at which the lead is currently at, the email, phone number, and lastly the remarks. And that completes our contact form. So this is basically the design of our page, or of the admin dashboard that I showed you all a picture of before. But no screen is complete without the functionality, right? This was just the design section of it. We will also have to develop the functionality and make the screen functional to call it a whole screen. So how do we do that? A very important feature that we have introduced with our platform is the logic builder. Once the screen design is completed, this logic builder we can access through any of the components that we have dragged onto our canvas. You have to click on any of the components, and there's a separate icon which looks like a puzzle, which you can click on, and it navigates you to a separate modal, which is the logic builder. Now it is similar to how our editor screen is built. It is divided into sections. You have your logic blocks, right? You have your logic blocks such as if statements, if conditions. You have a section where you can create variables, as I am doing right now. These variables can also be manipulated in your logic. Then you have your API call blocks, which I'll take you through in just a moment. You have your Boolean blocks, math blocks. So basically what you would use traditionally in coding, you already have set blocks for it in our logic builder. And the good part, or the beauty of this logic builder, is that it also introduces a fun element to our functionality or to the development of our screen, because this is not traditional coding. Although as you will see soon, whatever I drag onto the canvas will be translated to traditional JS code in the bottom half of the page, which is a section known as the code viewer. Of course, this code viewer is non-editable, but it translates to traditional JS code. So the developer actually sees what he is doing by dragging the different components onto the canvas. We also have a dynamic wrapper section. So whatever you have dragged onto your canvas, whatever components, if there is some individual component manipulation to be done, or you want to set some values to individual components on the editor, which are present on the editor, you would find all of those components in that dynamic wrapper section. So the logic that I am developing here is for our invoice total. Depending on the quarter of the year selected, Q1, Q2, Q3, or Q4, a separate invoice total is to be calculated from all the invoice amounts present, and displaying that in a separate text component. So within our dynamic wrapper section, I am setting I'm using component instance blocks and component event blocks to set that drop down value to a separate variable. Now the API call block where this data has to be posted or the data has to be retrieved also needs a URL which comes from our data model that we have created as a prerequisite. So since I'm dealing with the invoice total, I have to use that URL in which this invoice data is stored. I also need to set header key values, setting the content type to application JSON, and also setting an authorization of a bearer token, which is also something you get at the time of database creation. Now this API call is to retrieve all of our invoice data. So to calculate that total, we do need the invoice amounts, right? And this call is basically to pull in all those invoice details. And then depending on the quarter we select, separate logic will have to be used to only calculate the total from those set invoice amounts. Now we have different divisions within our if block. We are setting it up in the form of an if-else if condition where the drop down is divided according to Q1, Q2, Q3 or Q4. And depending on that, on the quarter selected, we are calculating only those set invoice amount totals. So this first bit of logic is for Q1. Q1 denoting Jan, Feb or March, which would be 01, 02 or 03. If any of these invoice dates contain 01, 02 or 03, which means it's within Jan, Feb or March, we pull in that specific invoice amount and we add it with our invoice total, which we have set to 0 at the start of our logic. And similarly, we have to repeat the process for the different quarters. So you switch out the dates with 0, 4, 5 and 6, which should basically do the same thing in the logic, but it should render it according to the date selected. And lastly, once that invoice total has been calculated, you set it as a display in the bottom half of that card. So that completes our first bit of logic. Second is our contact form. So we can create the variables that would store all the user inputs. Here I think we have 8, which is name, company, department, industry, stage, email, contact number, and lastly remarks. So we're setting separate variables for all of these user inputs. Again, to get the user input within our dynamic wrapper, since we have dragged it onto our editor canvas, all of these components will be present in that pop-up button. So to grab the user input, I would first need the component instance block to show that it has been selected. Then I would need an event block, which I would set to change instead of click, because every time the user changes the value of the input, the new target should be captured, and then setting it to the variables that I have created. And all of these component instance blocks are divided according to ID. So that way you know that the different inputs are being tracked instead of just the same input being tracked. Here we have the email field. Then the contact number. And lastly, we have a remarks input. Once these inputs have been set up, we would also need an instance block for the button and a click event block, so that when the user clicks on submit, a particular action is to be performed. Now here, from our previous block of logic, I have copied a specific section so that I can use the same API call block without actually having to create it all over again. The changes I would have to make is changing the route of the URL, because this is a different data model that I would be populating with the lead data, and then setting up a payload key value block so that all of these would go through in our API call. And to be honest, these are just some of the features that make development easier. You saw that I copied the code blocks from one canvas to another, which saved up on so much of my time. So that's so within the screen, if you have complex blocks of logic, you don't have to doing maintaining that similar functionality. You don't have to go over it all time and again. You can create it once and then copy specific code blocks so that you can use it within different blocks of logic. So this is our lead contact form completed. The third one would be setting up our lead assignment. So the dropdown that I have added gets set, so the key for it gets set in our local storage, which we can use in our logic lock to grab the value of the user that has been selected, and then in a separate post call, I will be sending that assigned user value to the same lead table, but to the same ID that I have already submitted. So I'm setting that drop down input value to a variable that I have grabbed from the local storage, and then performing my checks if such a value exists or not. Now if it exists, since I have grabbed it from the local storage, I need to first pass the values because I need the ID which is present in that local storage block. And the only way the ID can be grabbed is if you pass the values, so that you can actually use some of those values. this variable is to pick the value of the user that is selected. So in our local storage block, for the drop down selection, selected value is how it is stored. So I am grabbing that specific selected value property from our past local storage variable, and along with that I'm also grabbing the ID. So when I am setting this user to that lead, I need to make a put call instead of a post call, because this entry already exists, which comes through from our lead contact form. So the ID serves that purpose. Now that I have grabbed the value for the user as well as the ID, we can attach the API call block, which I have also copied again from the other block of logic. And I'm changing the method to put while also sending in the user value. And along with our URL, we would also have to attach that ID so the call knows which entry to update. And that should cover all the blocks of logic which we require for our admin dashboard in today's session. Making some final UI changes, again to make the dashboard more pleasing to the eye, and then we can go ahead and save, indicating that our dashboard has now been created. So now that our screen is completed, I would also like to remove the grid lines, which should show the audience, which I can use to showcase to the audience that what I have designed right now is not too different from the actual preview. Like, this is how your application would look when you deploy it, or your screen would look once you deploy it. So basically what you see is what you get. You don't necessarily have to keep switching from your editor screen to the preview section to view how your application is turning out. You can simply do it from the same screen by disabling the grid lines. Another very cool feature of our platform. And also, now that the development is done, I would like to mention to the audience, the screen is slightly different from what I showed at the start, in the sense that there is one less card, and certain components may not seem the same, but that is only because I did not want to take you through the same repetitive development work, because additions can always be made to this admin screen depending on your use case. All the additional requirements can be set up in the same way, in a manner that is similar to what I have just shown. So in order to not take our audience through the same repetitive work, I have only displayed one card, one chart, one table, to basically just give you an essence on how easy development on our platform can be. One last thing before we finish is I would like to show the audience what we have built today. So right now I am adding in some details to our contact form. And then once all the details have been added, I will click on submit, and this lead then gets added into our database. And it will also be shown in the table below. And once that table showcases the new value, we can also assign the user and again click on submit so that that lead gets updated with the assigned user.